the very roots of evil, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is alchemy, the whole state of things, pure violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here.
Welcome to Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins. As always, sponsored by the People's Institute for Revolutionary Semiotics. Before we introduce today's discussion, we just want to mention briefly, we do have a Patreon account at www.patreon.com/MUHH. Consider tossing us $1 a month there. We have made our Discord server available. There's talk of reading groups resurfacing. I don't want to overpromise
This Sunday.
So there'll already be one in the bag that
Yep.
we'll make available to patrons by the time that this episode comes out. Hopefully everything being on the up and up. I don't want to speak too soon because we're both dealing with a lot as far as change is concerned in life, but we're going to stick with this kind of theme of libidinal economics to some extent, but we're going to incorporate Derrida and a chapter from his book called Given Time, number 1, Counterfeit Money. The title of the chapter is The Time of the King.
And this was originally a lecture too, which is interesting,
okay, gotcha.
right? Yeah.
So it's interesting because I feel like the Derrida, there was something we looked at alongside
His essay of Freud, right?
I think that I
on the-
enjoyed quite a bit, but I don't like the cryptonomy from, what was it? Abraham and Turok's,
shit.
the whatever that was.
Oh,
that was
God.
Derrida that I did not really
Okay, that
fancy at all.
But Derrida wrote a preface for the Abram and Turok book on the cryptonym, the cryptogram. Fuck, what's it called?
Cryptonomy
Might be right.
But it had to do with the Wolfman. I should probably just look it up instead of being an idiot.
The Wolfman's magic word, a cryptonomy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that was definitely a difficult but fascinating book. And Derrida writes a difficult and fascinating preface for it. So that might have been the first thing of Derrida's that we looked at together. Although
it was. It was.
I don't think we talked too much about his preface because already that cryptonomy book.
I think I might have started reading it, but I can't recall it.
It's been 4.5
It's been
years,
a while.
3.5, 4 years. That's still available for listening.
I'll put it in. Yeah, I'll put a link to that. Both conversations.
Or at least both conversations. Yeah. I guess that's all the Derrida we've looked at, right? Mainly the second. Obviously, as I said, we didn't really talk about Derrida's preface too much, but we did talk about his essay on Freud.
Mystic Writing Pad? Something to do with Mystic Writing Pad.
On the Mystic Writing Pad and From Writing Indifference.
If I understand it correctly as well, Derrida does not delve into Freud until later on in his career.
Besides that, I mean, that essay's from the early 60s, late 50s, because Writing Indifference collects some of his early essays. So apart from
maybe
that,
I'm wrong,
I mean, and then in grammatology, Freud isn't absent. He's not the main center of that work, obviously. If anybody is, it's Rousseau, but Freud isn't absent from of grammatology. And then there's what is it? The postcard, isn't it titled or subtitled From Socrates to Freud? He wrote a lot of books. Yeah, From Socrates to Freud and beyond. So, I mean, yeah, and he was married to a psychoanalyst.
Oh, I did not know that.
Derrida was, yeah. In any case, he doesn't really talk about Freud at all in this lecture, but I know that you found parallels with some of the Freud stuff that we've done over the past, since we've started recording together. And so, have at it. Like, if we can bring Freud into the conversation, although he does mention, as I told you just a minute ago before we started, he does bring up repression in this lecture, but I don't think he even mentions Freud's name when he brings it up. I assume he doesn't really have to. Well, he does mention Freud's name on page 16 when he reminds us that for Freud, the ego or part of the ego can be unconscious. At least by the time of the ego and the id, Freud will kind of say that the majority of the ego is conscious, but not all of it, right? So that's where Freud's name gets brought up in that first lecture, but it's just a passing mention. So,
I think the idea of hauntology is brought into sharp relief for me in this text, and I think this is even a precursor to Spectres of Marx, which I think you can draw, like, to me, the linearity makes such perfect sense with respect to, I guess I'll just try to dive in really quickly in terms of where I see Freud having the connection would be the concept of the primal father, and that sort of being the sons gathering together to murder the primal father for holding all the women, that being a prime example of the haunting of the Oedipal relation that persists, at least for Freud, in that the structure of our desire and our debt comes from this, yeah, the kind of debt to the father, the caregiving relationship between infant, between the helpless infant, owing its sustenance to the father and the mother, and that debt being this kind of this fundamental structure, but through the absence of the father, through the absence of the parents, or let's say the ancestors, if you want to say this, draw a connection to dead labor, for example. So it's the pre-existing lifetime and lifetimes that have been extracted, or not extracted in that sense. Maybe once we get to capital, then capital extracts lifetime. But in the sort of primordial sense, it's the debt to our parents that structures our economy early on, that is most directly libidinal, right? Because it's about satisfying our needs for sustenance and shelter and affect, let's say, affection.
mm.
But I've said a
So,
lot there. I don't know if I wanna maybe pause and let you make sure I haven't
well,
gone off the rails too hard here.
no, I don't think so. I mean, like, I would just say since we talked about the primordial father of the horde last time, I don't really have much to add except to say that one thing that's interesting that came to mind reading this lecture was that at the end, when he cites the Baudelaire short story, very short story, one of the words that the translator uses for some turn of phrase at the end was about the prodigality of the friend that's being discussed. And anyway, it made me think of the prodigal son, obviously. Just that word out of context just triggered that moment in my head, recalling the parable of the prodigal son. I only bring this up because the parable of the prodigal son, as I was thinking about it while you were talking, does seem to turn on its head, or at least, so to speak, Christian way, perform this alpha bung of, this dialectical overturning of the story of the primordial father. Because what do we have? We have this with the prodigal son, this younger son who wants to get his inheritance early and go off and hedonistically indulge in his birthright before the allotted time of his father's passing. And of course, the story ends with the several moments where he comes back and wants to be welcomed back into the fold. And of course, the father welcomes him back. But the older brother, who's never left and never asked for his early birthright, who's been working alongside and toiling along in the family fields, and he calls bullshit, right? And he's like, "Man, why are you going to reward this kind of behavior, this lack of fidelity and faithfulness to you?" And of course, he's rebuked for being resentful, for being a little bitch, right? And kind of, and it's not about, it's not about that. My son was lost, but now he's found, and all that shit, right? So I just, for whatever reason, it's not only does it seem to play off of this theme of this mythological hoarding father and turn that image on its head, but it goes to the heart of what Derrida is getting at, to this paradox, this aporia of the gift, because there's a certain way in which the father has to forget the liberality with which he bestowed this early gift on to his son that normally is reserved for after he's dead, which again, paradoxically, would be a gift that he never gives because he would be passed away. Anyway, I just to like jumpstart some of this paradox that Derrida is trying to locate. I thought we could turn on its head
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
the
that's
Freudian
good.
story. And I mean, I guess I would say, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in this lecture, and I urge the audience to read. Obviously, I hope that the audience is inspired to read every text that we take up to discuss. But I would say there's going to be certain moments in the Derrida text that we're not going to be able to spend time on. Right, the opening part about Madame de Maintenon, we're not going to have time for. We're going to probably skip over some of the shit about Heidegger, although it may come up. But I will say we can sort of definitely jump into this paradox that Derrida is looking at, whereby giving a gift, and we can start off by making some circles because Derrida is interested in this cycle and circle. I'll step back and let's proceed maybe from Mos, right? Because you and I have discussed the gift before, including another work by Mos on magic. We've spent time on Mos, and one of the things he says towards the end of the lecture that I think can help us begin his reflections on this paradox is the fact that Mos writes this book on the gift, but he talks about everything but the gift. And I think for Derrida, it's because in Mos's analyses in these early cultures, in the in the Kula or the potlatch and blah blah blah, right? His main theoretical reflections on what he's calling gifts and gift giving is, as you and I have discussed in many different venues or many different episodes, we've talked about the fact that the gift being given is expected to redound with interest and burn a hole in the pocket of the donee, right? The one who is being given the gift, there is an interest that accrues in the gift, and it accrues this magic that demands a kind of gift back, a counter gift that would not only be equal but would excel the value, quote unquote, because what does value mean here? It would obviously be it would obviously be different than any kind of exchange value, right?
Be a symbolic exchange, right?
Yes.
Symbolic exchange.
Derrida is basically saying Mos is not describing the gift in which I am investigating it, because for Mos, the gift is already embedded in this cycle of return of interest, in this cycle in which the gift immediately is inscribed in symbolic exchange, which implies a necessity of restitution, of restoration, lest one be haunted by evil spirits that would fucking take vengeance on you for being a bad donee, for being an ungrateful,
a prodigal son,
right? That's the interesting thing for me, is that, and this gets to the heart of it, Derrida puts it in these terms where he's like, look, in the way he sets up the logic, giving a gift paradoxically cancels itself out because of the acknowledgement, the recognition that there is a symbolic intention at play in this, and what he's calling an economy. It already involves us in the arena of exchange, symbolically determined,
and obligations,
and obligations,
obligations on our obligations of our time, which is symbolically represented, I think, by the gift and the force of the gift.
Yeah,
and so also obviously intimately tied up in the reciprocity and the return, which is a big focus of Derrida's here in this text. But I think that circuit, which the circular nature of the gift itself, of the exchange and the reciprocity, belies the absence at the heart of it, the hauntological absence of the primal father or the sovereign or the state. We could even draw that very distinct, like what the three territorial machines in Anti-Oedipus. What's the first one? The
primitive territorial machine,
right? Represented by the primal father, and then the state,
the despotic
regime, represented by the monarch or the sovereign king, etc. Which has the despot, which has so much purchase. And this chapter of the book is focused on the time of the king. And under the capitalist machine, we have the dispersed sovereignty of all of us are participating in the decision, the responsibility for how much time is to be extracted and who is to be sacrificed and what is to be sacrificed and how much is to be repaid. All of that now flows around a sort of void, a great zero
Yeah.
that haunts the entire market exchange, which also goes into my notion of all societies being primitive and that they are all about human sacrifice, whether it be the immediate sacrifice when we think of human sacrifice, the killing of an individual symbolically. This would be so instead of that, we have the system of capitalism where we extract little bits of life, right? That's the death on the installment plan setup where everyone's sacrificing little portions of their lifetime to the market or to capital, or because there's already this ledger of debt that is owed, represented by firstly the system of cruelty, the marking on the body, the debt to the tribe for your subsistence, right? And the marking later on that moves to ledgers and so forth. And now it's on computers and what have you, but like there's still
the red and black ink, right?
the structuration of the negative debt that's owed, which I don't know if you want to flip that, right? We generate a negative in the ledger, but then that becomes a positive on the other side of the ledger. So there's a magic about creation of money in that sense. But I might be getting way.
No. I mean, I
I'm
think this is
already
all good.
spiraling out of control.
This goes to what I was saying with 185, 186, page 185, 186 of Anti-Oedipus in the vintage volume. They bring up Mose, they bring up Levi-Strauss, and Deleuze and Guattari say, why is it necessary that the giver also be in the position of someone who has been robbed, so as to demonstrate clearly that he does not expect an exchange nor even a deferred exchange? It is theft that prevents the gift and the counter gift from entering into an exchangeous relation. I'm only going to bring that up not to counter what Derrida is saying here, but actually to say that Deleuze and Guattari are actually simpatico with what Derrida is doing here, right? Derrida speaks about this constitutive, non-psychological, non-psychoanalytic version of forgetting that would be akin to the Heideggerian forgetting of being, but it's this forgetting that is the true form of gift giving and vice versa. Because as soon as we enter into recognition that we are giving a gift to someone, we're giving something to someone as a subject, we've already entered into this symbolic realm whereby we're so good and generous, and they try to repay us back immediately with they are gracious and they acknowledge and they recognize, right? It's the Hegelian moment of the dialectical moment of recognition, right? Of almost master and slavery, which is why Derrida doesn't have to bring that up in this lecture, but that's kind of the backdrop, the sort of prototype of all of this. And
there's also the hua relative to that, right? The obligation to return the implicit.
Is that the Mosian term, or is that?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Spell it HUA.
HUA. Yes.
Okay. I'd forgotten that. That's good.
I think I have something here in my notes. So.
But again, it goes back to debts and credit, like you were saying, with not only with Nietzsche and this question of
how it's how or hua, HAU or HUA.
Okay, well,
the spirit of the gift which demands its a return or something like that.
Right. Yes. You said the word reciprocity with interest is how I would kind of say it, right? I mean, that's how these things can spiral out of control. And at a certain point, the cycle of exchange of gift giving has to, in Mose's sense, has to end at a certain point so that a stock can be rebuilt, and then you can start from zero intensity. I do think that theft is a great word here for what Derrida is talking about in the sense of a non-psychological forgetting. It's as though for a gift to be truly given, it has to always already be forgotten before any recognition takes place. A constitutive forgetting, lest one enter into the cycle of debt, which would again cancel the gift in its own way. Because if I owe you for giving me a gift, it's not a gift. again, I know we're staying on a very basic level of what Derrida is doing and goes into, but I think it is important to dwell on even the most basic way that he's saying that a true gift is already the cancellation of the gift. There's already a dialectical moment in the very intentionality of giving. And as we know, like, oh, what do you give someone who has everything? We have that turn of phrase. We also have the thing where it's like, well, it's not how much you paid for it. It's not what you got. It's the thought that counts. Derrida does get at something pretty fundamental in our notion of giving gifts, where before the even act of the giving of something to someone as subjects, there's already a pre-established accord and agreement and a faith and a credit that establishes the situation based on which any gift can be given, the intentionality, even if you want to call it that, right?
What do you think about the forgetting? Because we don't think of it this way that we owe. I don't think that we take Freud's point about the helplessness of the infant. We don't think
Mm,
about that as structuring our libidinal and psychical and just playing out straight up what we normally think of as economy. We don't think about the debt that we owe to society. Prisoners pay debts to society, but we don't
yeah,
think of
we
ourselves as paying debts to our
to
society. So
parents.
it's
Or
a
you
way
mean to?
that
I
we
thought you meant to our parents.
well,
You
both,
meant to.
both, I think,
Okay.
to our parents and to the state subsequently, like
Yeah, yeah.
as you move along from the tribe to the state, sovereign, yada yada.
Do we pay our debt to the state by becoming productive workers, productive bodies? Is that kind of at least the neoliberal
Yeah, or
understanding of
maybe by taking care of our parents when they can't take care of
that?
us, that
Certain
we
cultures
reciprocate. Like,
emphasize that more than others. You know, like
sure,
Japanese culture, right? That's
I'm
a
just thinking at the primal level of like the original primal horde sort of. That's maybe the return gift to the parents for like are productive to produce so that we can, but also like I think maybe more directly would be the reproduction of society by having children,
yep.
but also maybe taking on the future debt of care for the elderly parents is maybe the implication I really hadn't thought about in great deal.
Well, it is interesting that we talk about. I mean, just the way that Derrida in this text is problematizing the notion of giving time. What does it mean to give time? Time is not a thing, etc. But we also use give in all kinds of, as we give life and death, we take life and death, we give birth. I say we, as
The
humans or
royal
as
we, the
mammals,
editorial we.
the women of our species have the capability of giving birth, or at least persons with, with wombs, if we want to be woke about it. So to give birth is an interesting turn of phrase. And we use it figuratively too, to give birth to something, to give rise to something, to give attention, to pay attention to, because we were talking about earlier about the notion of debt and credit. We were talking about the phrase from Paul, I think it's in Romans, where he says the wages of sin are death, or is death. That Greek word wages is the pay normally accrued by a soldier in an army, but it then was generalized to all recompensation for work, labor done. And so implying that sin is a work. In Christianity, there are works in faith. So there are good works and bad works, right? I suppose there could be bad works of sin. And that is a cycle of exchange that is meant to be broken by the giving of God's Son in Christianity, the giving of Jesus giving his life so that we might have eternal life, etc. Right? The
We might
ultimate
have
scapegoat.
eternal lifetime. I wouldn't.
Mhm. To compensate us for the hoarding of life and death the earthly kingdom,
Very nice.
right? You were talking about this before we start recording with this whole logic of the sovereign is the one who's hoarding time or
Yeah. Well, capital definitely, I think, really is
capital.
what draws it. I
Mhm.
mean, the sovereign, I think, because now I think the sovereignty is the lack of the sovereign in the market is what the hauntology is of capital. Because now, instead of there being a focal point for, oh, we just will depose the king. Now we have to depose all of society. So it's a more robust
Yeah,
means.
capital scatters the body of the king of the despot throughout power
Precisely, yes.
relations. Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean,
So now
because
then it
yeah,
becomes we have to overthrow ourselves, which is that's a difficult wager for us to, since
because
we
we are all capitalists at this point, right? I mean, for better or worse, that's
exactly.
inevitably. And it goes back to what you brought out, is why it's called the time of the king. Yes, Derrida starts with 2 or 3 pages on this letter written by Madame de Maintenon, and she says, "The king takes all my time. I give the rest to Saint Cyr, to whom I would like to give all this charity." So the king takes all my time. That's how he starts off this lecture, and so it is hanging over the rest of the 30 pages of the lecture of this time. The king takes all, but there's a remainder.
There's a surplus value that's extracted,
Yeah.
which goes to
So
Marx and the MCM circuit as it pertains to the disembodied sovereign of capital that
and
can't
even
be
in the,
harnessed in the body of one figure or point. So it's a more robust system for managing libidinal economics, because
I
there's a
mean,
lot more force to overcome.
to go back to the New Testament, there's the parable of the talents. There's the master who gives his servants, he gives one servant 10 talents, another servant, was it 5 or 2? And then the last servant 1 talent. And the servant with 1 talent is so worried about, and he tells them to go out and invest, right? Make use of this time to multiply
The gift of time.
talents. The gift that it's money, these talents. It's interesting that they're called talents, because we could obviously symbolically probably bastardize the story, but at least in English allows us to extrapolate that the talents being given aren't just money, but also our abilities. But in any case, obviously the 2 servants given more of the money, more of the talents, they invest and they multiply and they bring back a surplus value. But the one given only 1 talent is so worried about losing it that he buries it and hides his light under a bushel, as Bible school might say. And of course, he's fucking castigated and cast out of the house for not making use of his time, not investing his time. Because I do think giving time is also
But that's
investing time.
the thief taking he's the thief in that scenario who breaks the cycle.
Possibly, I wouldn't read it that way, but that's an interesting way of reading it.
Well,
I
I
read
just
it.
think how the reason the how or the whoa
Mm,
is the responsibility, the spirit of like the fucking demiurge, I think,
mm,
really the Gnostic stuff that also I think I got faint traces of here with this idea of hauntology, and if a first mover as far as debt is concerned, like who sets the system of debt in
right.
motion and therefore is the locus of control through its absence, but its ever present absence, its ever present deferral of time, because we have to pay back the first debt that's taken out always. We're always born
Mm,
into a system of
mhm.
debt and obligation and structure that striates the strata that we have to navigate, because it's already been laid down by history, by the previous debt. Before we even have a chance to do anything, we already owe. There's a price on our heads. There's a price of original sin that is held over us.
It's interesting. I mean, you called him a thief, but I think that the theft that Dillis and Guattari talk about, that I was trying to relate to the kind of transcendental forgetting that Derrida is equating with gift giving. I think that theft is a kind of positive theft. It breaks the cycle or disrupts the cycle of giving in a cycle of exchange. This seems actually to get closer to this notion of hoarding that we see with your first example of the bringing back up the primordial father hoarding the women, and obviously not making use of them in a way that would enter into the cycle of reproduction. This servant given the 1 talent is hoarding the talent
Right. He's
rather
going
than
against the
reproducing
prohibition.
something.
Right. He's going
Yeah,
against the
yeah,
prohibition
yeah.
in a sense, or the totem animal by he's keeping his kill kind of in a
He's
way,
not being
or
fruitful and multiplying and all that, right?
right.
He's not
there's no open exchange on the coin or the talent that he
Yeah.
gives, right? He takes it out of circulation.
He takes it out of circulation, which is
But I
maybe
think
what
you
you
can.
saw as theft. Maybe
I
that's
mean,
what
of course, Derrida would love the divergence there, right? Because you can read it. You can read it both ways. I think, in a sense,
Yeah.
in a way, the theft does bring an end to the cycle, the endless cycle of debt and obligation to repay. You would just have to forget. You'd have to forget and forgive.
Well, this is where it's the
In a
whole
way,
when is a gift not a gift? First two servants, it's a gift in the positive sense because they go out and they do something with it. Whereas it's a gift in a negative sense for the last one who was too afraid to do anything with it and treats it like poison and has to evacuate it as soon as possible. This is where the German gift, as I told you, meaning poison, but also our language of donor and donation goes back to the word for dose, right? Which is also poison. And it's also the word for giving, dosing out, giving out. It is embedded in our language that gifts are inherently like the pharmacon, as you immediately knew when we talked about this. Derrida's investigations of the pharmacon, which has highly negative and positive, life-giving and death-giving properties.
the market, the diffusion of the sovereign power is good on the side that it allows power to be more evenly distributed, at least theoretically, right? But at the same time, we can imagine let's say a magnanimous fucking sovereign. It might be better to have a magnanimous sovereign than a disinterested, dispersed sovereignty that lacks any sense of obligation to its subjects.
So a magnanimous versus a magnanimous sovereign.
A little suppleness isn't going to save us. There's the suppleness of the market over the rigidity of the sovereign, or there's more suppleness in the gift exchange in a sense because the obligations are less quantified in a sense that time really is of the essence. Certainly time I think is wrapped up in the gift as far as the return of it and the endless cycle of reciprocity. It's obscured somewhat in the way that taking of our lifetime or labor time from Marx. He says labor time. I want to make it very distinctly clear. We're talking about lifetime. Two separate words, not lifetime
Hyphenated.
one word, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is really what we're talking about is dead labor is lifetime. Again, to draw that parallel back to the debt owed to the parents by the infant, the same applies to the state. It's an inescapable human society bondage in a way because we always owe a debt. What is our life worth to us, right? It's invaluable to us. It's the most valuable thing we have to give on offer in the marketplace is our time. We are reduced to bare life in the sense of we have nothing. We are impoverished fully except our lifetime.
I mean, again, this is what I brought up earlier with the Hegel, the clash of consciousnesses and the master slave dialectic, right? Your labor or your life. That's what we are inevitably still facing. I will say, just to go back to the text, I thought I would read this is from page 23, this paragraph, kind of summing up the paradox. As the condition for a gift to be given, this forgetting must be radical, not only on the part of the donee, but first of all, if one can say here, first of all, on the part of the donor. It is also on the part of the donor subject that the gift not only must not be repaid, but must not be kept in memory, retained as symbol of a sacrifice, as symbolic in general. For the symbol immediately engages one in restitution. To tell the truth, the gift must not even appear or signify consciously or unconsciously as gift for the donors, whether individual or collective subjects. From the moment the gift would appear as gift, as such, as what it is, in its phenomenon, in its sense and its essence, it would be engaged in a symbolic, sacrificial, or economic structure that would annul the gift in the ritual circle of the debt. The simple intention to give, insofar as it carries the intentional meaning of the gift, suffices to make a return payment to oneself. the simple consciousness of the gift right away sends itself back the gratifying image of goodness or generosity of the giving being who, knowing itself to be such, recognizes itself in a circular, specular fashion in a sort of self recognition, self approval, and narcissistic gratitude. I know we kind of already laid out that aspect of what Derrida is highlighting in the paradox of gift giving, but I thought reading that passage helps to maybe crystallize further for the listener what's at stake at the most fundamental level for Derrida in this investigation.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw attention to that aside from all this ontological libidinal economy that I'm focusing on.
I don't think it's unrelated to what you're bringing up, though. It's
Certainly in terms of the obligations, as the most direct.
well, what I was saying earlier about giving time, as Derrida is, and what I was bringing up with the talents too, was this notion of investing time. And if we go back to Freud, as we've talked about, Freud's concept of cathexis, or of what
Yes.
Strachey translates
Got it.
as cathexis in Freud. Freud calls it Besetzung. The French call it investissement, right? Investment, which we see in the Deleuze and Guattari Anti-Oedipus translation, because they're using Freud's terminology when they talk about preconscious and unconscious investments, et cetera, right? And I do think that investing time is what is, we could say, it's inseparable from a libidinal economics where the in vitro is cathected, invested. There is a Besetzung. And for Freud, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'll just bring it up for the listener. Investment, as the French translate it, is much better than cathexis, because cathexis is just digging up a Greek etymology and crafting a neologism for a word that exists in German, and investment exists in English and also in French. I think that the thing in the German is, yes, you are investing time, energy, etc., but you're also delimiting a territory. You're actually staking out a ground. And I think that that's why one of your favorite things, Coop, if you remember from on narcissism, I believe, or maybe it was on the melancholia. We'll have to look back, but Freud saying one does not give up a libidinal position like
Willingly, yeah.
willingly, right? Like it's not something that's just done by happens. It has to. It's almost like in Deleuze, right? We are forced to think. We are forced to face a problem. I think that Freud is kind of positing something similar too, right? It's not as though one can just be like, oh, I have this repression. I'm just gonna work through that. Freud's like, nah, this takes like concerted fucking effort that goes beyond just a conscious will or even willingness. It
Absolutely.
involves, yeah,
It goes back to masochism of the economic problem, masochism as well.
how so? Go forward with that.
Just because of it goes to maybe the how, like the unconscious force of the gift and its obligations,
Mhm.
right? There's like an unconscious masochistic relationship that we feel the guilt, the unconscious guilt that we have to give something back. We have to return that through our lifetime, through our labor, right? We have to work. And that guilt goes back to the primal father. It goes back to the Oedipal shit with both the parents and the state. And if you want
The
to,
superego, the
it goes
categorical
to,
imperative, maybe
right,
even.
our dead labor as well. We have to work off the debt because sort of the deferral of the present time of our present lifetime has
Mhm.
to be continuously deferred because we always are borrowing time from the next generation of humans, right? We're extracting
That's
our
good.
lifetime, their lifetime, and that's kind of like what the national debt is.
We're
People are
leveraging
always
it, is what you're
people are
saying,
clamoring
right?
for, yes. So we are borrowing from the future. That's what the national debt is. That our children will have to repay. We're already putting our children in bondage to repay this debt because we're always borrowing from the eternal
That's
present.
good.
The present is always different. I mean, getting really Derrida with it. It's like
No, yeah.
the present, which is the gift. The funny thing in English, there, the present being
Oh,
having
it's same in French.
the
Derrida's
two
playing off
meanings.
with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But it's really amusing. because I think there's even like a Kanye lyric, or there's one that's like, "My presence is a present" as well, which
For
goes to
Derrida, the gift cannot be present. It cannot make itself present or a present, right? He's playing off of this constitutive cancellation of the gift, right? It cannot become present, which is why it has to be a constitutive radical forgetting, as he says. To shift gears for a moment, you've seen the movie rendition of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, right?
yes,
And you know the villain of the movie, spoiler alert, Martin, played by Stellan Skarsgård, who, as we know, plays Baron Harkonnen in the Villeneuve Dune movies. So at the end of the movie, it's been figured out that he's one of the killers. He took over from his father in the movie, killing these women. Daniel Craig's character, Mikhail Lundvisk, he's like spying around and Stellan Skarsgård's character's home and notices that the guy comes back, and so he like leaves out the back door and stumbles as he's like trying to get away. And you know, Stellan's character Martin like approaches him, is like, "Hey, you know, what are you doing out here?" Blah blah blah. And he's like, "I've got some news for you. Why don't you come in for a drink?" And of course, that's the way to lure him into his kill room and tie him up, string him up, and you know, he's explained to him like, why do we ignore our instincts? The fear of offending is greater than the fear of pain, because he's offering him this supposed gift, hospitality, generosity, this gift. It doesn't matter if it's a drink, it's still the intention of welcoming you into the home.
when is a gift not a gift?
And that's what I was going to say. That's when Baron Harkonnen says, when is a gift not a gift? Because in the Dune universe, Leto first knows that this gift from the Emperor of taking over Arrakis, the planet of Dune, with its wealth of spice, is a red flag. But he can't say no. Or, I mean, if he did say no, it would lead to ultimately the same outcome, which would be the demise of the family, perhaps even of his son, Paul. It might even lead to a worse outcome. But he knows that taking the gift or refusing the gift ultimately is going to enmesh him in unavoidable bad consequences. But at the very least, accepting the gift keeps the minor houses or most of the houses of the Landstrad on his
Yeah,
side. Is that
yeah,
kind of the
yeah, because
calculation?
it goes back to Hegel and the wager with the bondsman, right? Because I can either take my death right away
Mhm.
up front, or I can
I could
sting
take it in.
out because he delays his death. The return of the gift is his death.
He buys time.
He buys time,
He
but that
buys
is
some
all. But
time.
only some, like a limited amount of time, right? Then also the gift is an obligation to return spice profits too. Like if you want to have
That's right.
another level of the reading of the gift that is not a gift, is the expect of spice profit in that
Uh,
particular scenario. But also,
Theoretically, he would, if things go well, he would accrue some of that profit too. But he knows that this is not that, you know, the whole saying, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And it's like, this is a horse you need to examine thoroughly, because that is a Trojan horse. You look at gift Trojan horse in the mouth, right? I mean, it's kind of
oh,
interesting
that's
that we,
good, right? Oh, that's brilliant as far
I
as
mean, we do have that turn of phrase though, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but the Trojans abided by that maxim and they fucking got slaughtered for it, right? So in any case, I was just thinking about how there is a parallel between The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, obviously written by different authors, and Dune, the Dune universe, where Stellan Skarsgård plays a pretty good bad guy, is kind of saying this is the thing that most does too in The Gift, if you recall, Coop, where if we refuse a gift, entering into the gift counter gift escalating exchange implied, right, in the Kula or the potlatch or whatever. That's not the same thing, but you know what I'm saying. And if we refuse, at least in primitive times, but also in modern times, I think, if we refuse a gift, there's a way in which we're not just being ungrateful, but also we are showing beyond any reasonable doubt that we are not strong enough to enter into this interplay of exchange, of values, of prestige, of monetary accumulation, of blah, blah, blah. We show that failing to succeed in the gift giving ceremonies is one way of proving one's lack of worth. And it could be by acts of God. There are whole contingencies about this in the history of like usurious loans and stuff. There are all kinds of contingencies that could prevent us from succeeding in counter gifting with enough value, blah, blah, blah. But by refusing entering into the exchange altogether, it's not just rude in the sense in which the fear of offending, as the girl with the dragon tattoos villain says, but it's not just fear of offending that we're afraid of. It's the fear of, it's that we definitively show beyond all reasonable doubt that we are not strong enough to meet the occasion. And thereby we show our lack of worth beyond any doubt. It's kind of like what we said with Leto the First. If he refuses the emperor's gift, he loses all credibility. He loses all, and maybe that's the right word here, because we are talking about credit and debt in this exchange situation.
It's also akin to breaking the social contract, breaking the social bond in the sense of like, I mean, it goes back to the system of cruelty, even, right? And the prohibition against incest and the totem animal, right? Eating our own kill, then that destroys the opportunity for alliance to and society to exist and proliferate itself through
Or,
reproduction.
or the criminal in the fact that for Deleuze Guattari, the socius, its main function is to inscribe, is to mark bodies. And the criminal is the one who, as though the marks did not take, as though they were not sufficiently marked enough to abide by the initiation into the social fabric. So they have to be marked again. I think this is also why Cain is marked, at least in the Genesis story. And I'm trying to remember, I could be wrong, but is Cain not like the first one to at least indelibly be marked? I can't think of marking before that. So it's as though there had to be a greater mark, right? There had to be. I know that Deleuze and Guattari, maybe in passing, bring up the penal colony, I think, in Anti-Oedipus, right? Where the criminals have their
Yeah.
crimes or the
I think
logic of
it's
their
the
crimes
I
inscribed.
think it's the
It's
Kafka,
Kafka.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting there is that there's a displacement of the present in the mark because the mark allows us to
It's a promise of remembering.
it transcends the present because it's
Yes.
accessible through all time. So the marking of Cain serves as a warning, but only because it can be legible,
A
right?
warning to remember in the future. This is why I'm saying
Exactly.
it's like a future anterior type thing where I will have remembered. So
Yeah.
so it is deferring the present again in this way that Derrida is forcing
God,
us
that's
to
good. That's
confront.
so good in terms of even
Yeah.
just Derrida with respect to writing
Mhm.
and all that shit too.
My roommate and I rewatched 12 Monkeys last week, and I was thinking it's the same kind of structure, right? Of the present is what is perpetually deferred, right? The first time that they send back the character James, played by Bruce Willis, he ends up talking to the therapist that'll be the other protagonist, and she's like, "Do you believe?" He's saying like it's 1995, and she's like, "This is 1990. Do you believe 1995 is the present?" And he's like, "No, that's also the past, right?" It's like this whole fucked up temporality that has to loop back. It has to complete the cycle, right? The opening scene and the ending scene have to, like a Ouroboros, collapse in on itself for the present to finally get that, because the present is the moment in which, spoiler alert, the young James witnesses his murder as an adult in real time. That's when the present sticks and coheres. Maybe that was a little bit left field.
No, it's good. It's good to really draw out the idea of the deferred present. and the
Well,
way
it's the
that time.
Nachträglichkeit that we've talked about, right? The deferred action, I think, is how Strachey translates it. The Nachträglichkeit. In French, it's translated as après coup, which roughly is like after the fact, right? There's an aftermath, an afterwardness that Freud looks at with, he tries to locate in various ways. I won't go into it too deeply, but one of the interesting things is, at least one of the aspects is, at least in his notion of a kind of latency period. As we've investigated in some of his case histories, even the shorter ones, when Freud says in 1895 in his first book written with Breuer, Studies in Hysteria, he famously lays out this axiom or this declaration that hysterics primarily suffer from reminiscences. It's not the initial trauma for Freud that is, it's not the initial trauma, it's reactivation in the system of repression. It's this aftermath that actually triggers the onset of the hysteria or the neurosis, or, and so, there's a certain sense in which the logic of repression is constantly not only being deferred, but is referring back. It's never now,
Oh,
right?
that's
It's
good. That's
it's situated in the past, but it won't have meaning or significance until the future event. And it's between those two ping-ponging back and forth that the network, the chain of signifiers, has to be reconstructed in this working through. Otherwise, there's always going to be a slippage, and there's
damn. That's brilliant. I love it. Love it. Excellent work.
no. This is stuff that we've talked around and about, and probably gone into detail with, but it's good to bring it up. And
A totally new light.
new shit has come to light.
Exactly.
I know we've talked a lot about this, and I know we haven't even done justice to the meticulous movements that Derrida does, and I think it's sometimes hard to go into nitty gritty detail without just like recapitulating everything he says. So,
I mean, there's some interesting stuff with Marx to
mhm.
underlying capital, the market that takes all my time, the working day, the commute, recovery, leaving only residual free time that is
The
is
vampire
shaped.
likeness of dead labor,
Yeah,
right? Because you were
yeah,
talking about lifetime with the
right,
hyphen,
exactly, yes.
and so dead labor being a vampire definitely sheds light on your point.
Freud's helpless infant, the psychic prototype of that subject whose time is always already under the control of the sovereign or capital.
And it also points to this deferring of time. The deference, as Derrida
Yeah,
would call it, is we spent time looking at, we gave time to Laplanche. And, Laplanche's theory is that even perhaps before birth, but especially in those early moments of, helplessness, there is this deferral whereby, for Laplanche, he takes it as a given that we are not born with an unconscious fully formed, right? That's part of the helplessness, not just that we do not have the animal instincts to navigate the world and successfully thrive and survive as infants, which literally means without speech. And Lacan takes that very far, and the notion of castration and the interest in the symbolic. But for Laplanche, we are bombarded first and foremost by our caregivers, mother or substitute, as Freud would say, with these sexual signifiers. This is what he calls generalized seduction. And we do not have the unconscious apparatus with which to translate them. They are literally unintelligible and uninterpretable. They form the bedrock that will become our unconscious. And it's that latency period, that Nachträglichkeit, that only later, as we mature and develop post-pubescently, that we start to form the, not only the intelligence but the unconscious network and psychical apparatus to begin to decode some of those ciphers that were embedded in and the scaffolding of our unconscious. And that for Laplanche is the real Nachtraglichkeit, that is only after the fact, much later, that the infant can have the ability to decode and interpret these sexual signifiers coming from the adult world. And I do think that that's the way that he really radicalizes Freud's helplessness beyond a kind of biological condition of physical helplessness. It's also a psychological, a psychoanalytic, a psychical helplessness that takes time, that has to be given time.
That's so good. I like this idea here, like Marx's capital is the economic historic AI version. Dead labor is the material body in which the other persists. The haunting of the other is
Mm,
dead labor. Like I mentioned earlier, what did I say? Something about communism would be the
I don't remember.
communism would be the overcoming of the scarcity of time, which is a complicated way of saying. I think it's like Jehu that said communism is free time and nothing else, which is
Yeah.
kind of a riff on Marx. Yeah, it was this afternoon. Communism is victory over the sovereign scarcity of time.
Okay. Okay. You basically said that. So sorry, future Coop.
It's interesting that time is always deferred and time is never present. It's only recognized. It's like the nut troglodyte. It's only recognized after that time can be sort of have a material existence or something like that.
Mm.
If you're following my logic here,
Well, I know
I mean that's kind of like a Hegel sort of take as far as the Owl of Minerva is concerned.
the Owl of Minerva takes flight at dusk. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's time is never present; it's always deferred,
But you will remember,
which is fascinating.
you will
The
remember that.
circularity of it.
Well, I was going to say you will remember our study of Deleuze's Bergsonism, which prepares us to look at logic of sense, especially with this notion of Cronus and Ion, which I won't bore you with at the moment. But Deleuze spends time looking at Bergson's assertion that the present is the most densely concentrated point of the past. Something like this. He may not use the word point. I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I will bore you with Cronus and Ion. I think I've told you this, where Deleuze looks at Chronos as where it's this ever expansive present. For him, going back to a Stoic logic, this can be attributed to the time of bodies and their intermingling. Whereas Ion, which he associates with the chronology of the event, is perpetually deferring the present. It's always already past and something that has always already happened or just about to happen. If you remember the 3 novellas plateau that we did a month or two ago, if the tale and novella are able to kind of develop Ion in one direction or the other, right? Something has just happened or something is just about to happen, but we never coincide with the present.
What's the
And
subtitle to the 3 novellas too? It's something what happened? What has
I think it's called What Happened. 3 novellas, I believe, it's called What Happened.
we have an episode by that title, so I should
3
remember.
novellas or quote
Or what
unquote
happened.
what happened. Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Interestingly, not when did it happen.
It's not about when because it just happened, right? So the when is less in question than the what. What was it that just happened, or what in the tale? I believe he says it's in the tale that something is always just about to happen. And obviously, the novel is a mixture because we always get these mixtures in Deleuze and Guattari, the supple and the rigid, or the smooth and the striated.
I don't know. I think I might have exhausted all
Okay.
everything. I might have given all, perhaps.
Oh,
I do like maybe that I would maybe want to emphasize this little statement as it pertains to dead labor in the way that Marx generalizes the kind of relationship between the helpless infant and its parents to society, right? Because living labor is born into an existing structure that is ruled by sovereign capital, which is like not fully present. It's the sovereignty, I should say, of capital is not fully present. It's dispersed. It's like a spirit that haunts the
Mhm.
market and haunts the market participants. So we have to submit to the conditions that are set by capital in order to survive, which places us in the form of exchange, in the circle, the MCM circuit, the
Mhm.
cycle of reproduction of capital, of surplus, of the remainder, of giving our time, the gift of our present time. If you want to riff, I mean, there's so much of this
Yeah.
endlessly go on in this game that Derrida plays relative to time and presence and absence. And the presence of absence, people might want to get their pitchforks at that point. So I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to
I,
get in
I
here
think
before we wrap up?
I think we've, as you said,
Given all,
given all to the king.
we've wagered all and given
No,
the
that
gift of our present time.
yeah. I mean, there's a turn of phrase that I in a book that I'm translating right now, where instead of murder or instead of killing, the author keeps talking. He's talking about Hegel, and he keeps using the Turner phrase "mise au mort" or or "mise à la mort" or "mise à mort," something like that, right? Which is like putting to death, which is their way of talking about state capital punishment, execution. And it's just interesting. The putting to death, the sovereign is the one who has power over life and death, that who can give life and give death. So it's just these old turns of phrase. But
That will wrap up this week's edition of the Machinic Unconscious Happy with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins. We'll see y'all next week, or should I say next time?
The very
Next
rules
time.
of eating, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is the whole state of things, the pure violence without option anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here. What I meant is the following.
With nothing left but recycled, whitewashed, lobotomized people, as in Clockwork Orange.